Okay, so we've been working on this web page, and we're using the we're adding in responsive design to make this web page look good for a mobile device, and we're using the um, technique of mobile first, which means you design it first for a mobile device, and then you change that design to look good on a desktop. So the first round of styling that we did was for a phone, and this is what we came up with. So that's why the screen is so shrink so small, and that is all well and good. But there is a possibility that we might have an intermediate device, maybe something like a tablet, right? So if I was looking at this in a tablet, this layout still actually functions, but there's a couple of things that I don't like. One, this text on my heading is a little bit small for a tablet. Also, this navigation is a little bit crazy for a tablet. And then this image is huge for a tablet, as well as this one is. I kind of like, actually, those cows. But nonetheless, so I want to change these things, but I want to change them on the same style sheet without impacting the mobile, the phone style. So what I'm going to do is go into the code, and without changing the HTML at all, without changing the phone styles at all, I'm going to go in here, and we're going to use a media query to create a new style sheet just for tablets. So I'm going to do @media, and we're going to use screen. This is a style sheet, or a style sheet section that's still for screens, but it's going to be a minimum width of, what do we think, maybe 600 pixels? Okay, and then that's going to start a style section for just that section, for just that piece. Now, one thing that I tend to do just to make sure that my media query was done correctly is I'll do a background color, something like I'm sorry, a body background color, something like red, just to see it happen, right? This is not what I want to keep, but that shows me that my style is working. And if I shrink this below 600 pixels, then the red disappears, which means my mobile styles are intact. Okay, all right. So that's just basically verifying that this is in decent shape. Okay, now what I want to do next here is a few little tweaks for the tablet size. All right, I don't actually want to change the body, but I do want to change the header. So the thing about the header is I want to make it a little bit bigger now that I'm breaking out of the phone. So I'm going to set the height of this. Before, the height was set to 100 pixels. I'm going to set it now to 173 pixels, which happens to be the height of the image that I'm using in the background. Okay. And then also in the header, I want to alter the background position, because you recall earlier the background position was set to this -27, right? So I want to get rid of that. I'm going to be real lazy and copy this, paste it in here, and then we'll set this to 0 pixels. All right, so that'll change out our header, and I'm going to refresh right here, and you can see that the header got bigger, and also, if you'll notice kind of the top of this picture, it bumps down a little bit. That's that 27 pixels that we were talking about before. Okay, now the text is way too small for that space, so we're gonna make some alterations to the header H1 style that we were using before. I'm going to set a font size that's a little bigger than normal. I'm going to use 56 pixels. And then I also want to change the padding to move it farther in and farther down. So my padding left is going to be, let's say, 45 pixels. And my padding top, which was 30 pixels, let's make it 60 pixels. Okay, and let's take a look at that. All right, so now that text is nicely large, right? So if I get too skinny here, it's going to pop to that. If I get bigger, it's going to pop up to that. And that's perfect. That's great. Okay, so that's my header. And now let's take a look at the nav. Now, for the nav, I'm going to try to do something. I'm going to try to use a strategy here called Flexbox. And basically the idea of Flexbox is that I'm going to set a horizontal navigation across the width of the page, but I'm going to set it such that the boxes will shrink, the individual list items will shrink with the page. So let's start by setting a nav. We didn't have to set a nav at all last time because we were letting the nav items, the UL, do all the work. But this time we want to set the nav to the width of the page. So we're going to make it a display block so that it goes to the width of the page. And then we're going to set a bottom border. We'll set this to just 1 pixel solid, and that'll default to black. And then I'm going to set a background color. So before, the background color was set by the list item, and now I'm going to use the same color, but there's going to be portions of the nav that show in the background, so I can't rely on just the list item anymore. But this is the color that I used before, and it's the same color I want to use now. Okay, and then finally I want to make sure that I don't have any padding on this guy. Okay. All right. What I want to do next is a little bit unusual, but basically what I want to do is I want to take this list. Let's just start with the list. Nav UL. Okay, and we use this up above right here, and all we did was set the list style type to none, and then we also set the margin and the padding. Well, I don't have to redo anything that's already been done, right? So I can leave all of those things alone, and now I'm just going to add some additional styles to that. So I'm going to set the width. I'm going to set the width of the list to 100%. And by using a percentage, it means it's going to fill the width of its container, but it's also going to grow and shrink with the container as well. Okay, so then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that padding is set to 0. Did I already have the padding set to 0? I can't recall. Yep, padding's already set to 0, so I don't have to do that. Okay, so here's the unusual part. We're going to use the flex box. And so what I'm going to do with the list is I'm going to set the display type to flex. And that might be a display type you're not familiar with. We usually use display block or display inline. And display flex, basically what that does is the children of this box, the items inside the box, will flex in width to fit the box. But we also need to say flex wrap none, and this keeps them from wrapping to the next line. Okay, now there's no point in looking at this yet because it doesn't do anything until I also set the children of the box. Okay, now if I go up and I look at the ULLI, this stuff right here, I've got it set to block, which could be a problem since I'm trying to do flex instead. And then I don't need this border anymore, and I don't need this background anymore because I'm setting them setting them in the nav. So basically, I don't want any of these styles that already exist from the phone version. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to use this to reset all the styles to their defaults. Okay, so if you haven't seen this before, it's a useful tool. So for this particular style, which is the list item inside the UL, inside the nav, I'm setting all of the styles within this selection to unset, which basically takes out all the styles and it basically restores the defaults for this type. Okay, so I'm doing that. Now I'm going to go ahead and put it in again, and this will allow me to set my new style characteristics as if I'm starting from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to set the width of each of these child items to 100%, which may seem strange, but the idea is that they'll strive for 100%, but they'll shrink individually in proportion because the parent is set to flex. Okay, and then I'm going to set the margin on this. I want 0 pixels of margin on the top and bottom, but I would like some margin in between the list items, so I'm going to set it to 10 pixels. Okay. Now you might be expecting a float because previously I had the display set to block, and then all of the list items did this. And one way to make a horizontal list is to set each one of these items to float left, and then the following one will float around it and around it and around it, and it makes it a horizontal nav. Well, I would do that, but one of the reasons I used flex was so that I wouldn't have to do that. It simplifies the process. So flex implies that float's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to set the text alignment for each one of these items to center, and I'm going to set the padding to 0. All right, I think that should be enough to see if this works. So, all right, so we refresh this, and basically the wonderful thing about this flex block is that each one of these list items has been set to 100%, right? But they can't be 100% because first of all they share the space, but then because of the flex, they're going to shrink and grow as much as I want them to. Now, the one thing they do that's not my favorite thing, but it's not the end of the world, is that if I bring them in so that these list items are not wide enough for all the text inside of it to fit on one line, then the text wraps inside of it. Now, I don't hate that, except that the items that don't wrap, their hover style doesn't fit this extra space. Okay, so that's not my favorite thing, but I'm going to live with it for now. If I really wanted to, I could spend all kinds of time to figure out styles such that that wouldn't happen, but not for this lesson, not for this lesson. Okay, all right, so there's my new nav, and when I get this below 600 pixels, my phone nav takes over. And when I get it above 600 pixels, my tablet nav takes over. Okay, so happy. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to go down and look at this image. Of course, this image is way too large. My resolution is not keeping up for one thing, but also it's just way too big. So we're going to go into the style section. And previously, we had used, let's see, we had used this image. I'm going to grab this, paste it in down here. Okay, what I want to do this time is I do want the image to grow with the page, but I don't want it to be too big. So I'm going to set this to a max width of, I'm just going to throw something out there, maybe 40%, so that the picture can never be wider than 40% of the page. Okay. Now I don't actually have to repeat this width. It's already in the style. And I also don't need to repeat this border or radius because I want to keep them, so I don't have to repeat them unless I'm going to overwrite it. But one thing I do want to do is I want to float this image to the left side of the screen. And when I do that, the text is going to wrap around it on the right side, which means I need a margin right of 10 pixels so that the text doesn't sit right on top of the image. Okay, so I'm going to refresh that and let's see what it looks like. All right, so now the text comes wrapping around the image, and as I widen the page and shrink the page, that image gets bigger and smaller. And I'm quite happy with that, except that the following image is wrapping around it. Okay, and I don't want that to happen. So if I look at the HTML, okay, I've put a separation between the first story called section and the second story called article. Okay, so what I'm going to do in my styles is, where is it? My styles. Okay, in my styles, I'm going to take advantage of this article tag, and I'm going to set it to clear left. And so if you're not familiar with this tag, what clear does is it supersedes the float. It cancels the float. So I'll have a float on the image and the text will wrap around it until you get to article. And then once you get to article, it's going to clear that float so that this doesn't happen. Okay, did I save it? Save, and then here, refresh, and now you'll see that this pops over to the left side. Okay, so at these kind of widths, it's doing something like I want it to do, where I've got a nice proportion between the image and the text that wraps around it, and then when I get down here, the same thing is happening, and it looks okay. I don't have a problem with it. The one thing is, though, that it's repetitive to me, and so what I want to do for the second story is I want to move this image to the right side of the screen. Okay, so we should be able to do that without a lot of difficulty. Because that image is inside the article section, I can just say article img, and so now I'm specifying just the image with the cows in it, and I want to float this one to the right side of the screen. And I probably need some right-sided margin, some left-sided margin now. So let's do margin right 0 pixels, because I already have padding in the container, so I don't want to double up on the margin. So then we'll do margin left 10 pixels. And indent all this stuff. Okay. All right, let's see what that looks like. All right, so now this picture is on the right side of the page. I really like these cows. I wouldn't mind having them a little larger. So maybe I'll take this max width command and maybe make it a little bit bigger for the cows. Alright, so now the cows are a little bit larger. Okay, so now at smaller sizes like this, if I'm something like this, I'm liking my heading, I'm liking my nav okay, I'm liking the first story called section, I'm liking the bottom story called article, I'm liking my footer still. So this is looking pretty good, except that if I widen this much, okay, this starts to happen. And so basically what's happening here is I set article to clear the float, so this won't float into this space, right? And that's good, that's what I want. But it's an uncomfortable space, and also this is getting crowded, and also this is getting in the way of the footer at this point. So my eventual goal is that I'm going to create yet another media query that breaks out of this page, that breaks out of this layout, gets its own layout anytime that the page gets big enough for a desktop computer. And so I'm wondering if something like this width is going to be relevant for my max width for my tablet, right? So if I say this is my max width for my tablet, then anything larger than this, I'm going to move over to another style sheet. And if that is the case, then I don't have to worry about fixing these little issues, because they'll never happen, because it'll be in a different style sheet for a different layout. Okay, so let's see what happens. If I were to squish this down, I'm still fine with the layout. Layout's looking just fine. So I want to make sure this layout is looking fine all the way to the point where it converts to mobile. Okay, it's getting a little bit tight in here, but then all of a sudden it moves to the mobile size. It's not a problem. Okay, so I am fine with this. And then when I get up to about this size, yeah, about that size, I don't want to go any bigger than that. So what I'm going to do is test the waters and see approximately what size that might be. All right, so I'm going to take this media query and believe I want to be outside that bracket. And I'm going to guesstimate, and let's see what happens if this is 800 pixels. And let's set a body background color to red. Okay, and all I'm doing here is testing the waters to see if I'm in the red. And I am indeed in the red. So how squished do we get? Ooh, pretty good. That was a pretty good guess. So this is what it would look like at 800 pixels, at just shy of 800 pixels. And then once I hit 800 pixels, then it would flip to some other layout. Okay. All right, that's great. That's great. I have no qualms about that. So I think we're good in terms of the tablet layout, which looks just like that. All right. And I'm going to attempt to edit in some other video that shows you what this looks like on an actual tablet. So that hopefully will have gone right here. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video, and I'm going to create a new video for our desktop layout, just showing you how the desktop styles could fit into this method.